Unbelievable twist, she slapped the billionaire, unaware he was her interviewer. Discover the astonishing truth behind Julia's bold encounter. Julia Morgan stood behind the bar, the weight of Cincinnati's elite bearing down on her like an oppressive fog. She poured a glass of Cabernet for a woman dressed in designer everything, feeling their judgment slicing through her like a winter chill. How many times had she faced this disdain? Each raised eyebrow reminding her of the sacrifices she made for her daughter, Sophie. At 37, with a mountain of student loans to contend with, and a waitressing job that barely fit into her dreams, she found herself teetering on the edge of desperation. Her thoughts circled like vultures, hounding her confidence. Was it really worth it working hard every day for just enough to provide for Sophie's bright future? Or was this path condemning her to a life of regret? As she straightened her blouse, determination surged within her. She was doing everything for Sophie, and yet, lingering doubts lurked in the recesses of her mind. Could she really pull it off? Was this another road paved with good intentions but ultimately leading to a dead end? A flash of well-tailored shoes caught her attention, and she looked up to meet Ethan Blake's warm gaze, captivating, steady, and entirely out of her league. The billionaire's reputation for revolutionizing the tech industry preceded him, but it was the arrogance behind that charm that set her on edge. Why was he here, mingling with the elites like some sort of misplaced golden retriever? It ignited a fire within her, a reckless urge to confront him, to challenge the assumptions he held about wealth and worth. Before we continue, I need to tell you about something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to the system and many people are losing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, click the bell and mark all notifications so you don't miss the next videos. And if you can leave a like, it really helps with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now let's continue. Her heart raced as she moved closer to him, challenging the distance that felt insurmountable. You think your money makes you better than anyone else, Julia said, her voice steady but fierce. But you're just another man exploiting a system those like me can barely survive in. The words spilled out before she could question their weight, a bold truth demanding to be recognized. As if in a moment of madness, she slapped him, not hard, just enough to draw gasps from the crowd. Shock coursed through her as she felt his cheek turn red, uncertainty slithering into her gut. In that electrifying instance, everything shifted. She was aware that she might have jeopardized her upcoming job interview with him, and yet, a surge of defiance drowned out her fears, eclipsing the very dreams she held for Sophie. How could she let this man, this stranger with an unmistakable influence, define her worth? As she turned away, regret bubbled up within her, coupled with an undeniable thrill. What had she done? Would she be thrust back into the stigma of judgment she fought so hard to escape? She had to reclaim control, to remind herself that her choices were her own, even as the temperature of ambition rose, pushing her further into the murky waters of opportunity and risk. The stakes mounted higher. She could sense the delicate line her dignity dangled upon, and she knew her next encounter with Ethan Blake could either tear down or uplift her entire existence. The tension spiraled. Who was she becoming? Where would this bold choice lead her? Julia steeled herself, trapped between a burgeoning ambition and a fierce loyalty to the life she had meticulously crafted for Sophie. The unanswered questions clawed at her, daring her to take another step, even as the truth loomed larger than ever. The fight for her identity was only just beginning. Julia stood in the back of the bar, her heart still racing from the rush of her impulsive act. Every clink of glass echoed her internal turmoil. Had she really just slapped Ethan Blake? The billionaire who was set to interview her for a position that could transform her life? Her pulse pounded as she replayed the scene in her mind, grappling with how she felt both exhilarated and terrified. The mingling laughter and polished conversations of the elite surrounded her, but she felt isolated, as if the laughter were mocking her. The moment hung in the air, heavy with a mix of adrenaline and anxiety. What had she hoped to prove? Julia sighed, reminding herself of the fractured pieces of her trust, the countless times she'd been judged, the painful echoes of her past. The thought of Sophie awaited her, lurking beneath her swirling doubts. Could Julia bear the consequences of her defiance? What would this mean for her daughter if she dashed her own ambitions? The weight of impending failure threatened to crush her resolve, but a rebellious spark flickered. She turned from the bar, moving towards the crowd, scanning faces with determination. Wasn't this encounter an opportunity? Perhaps, in some way, her audacity could carve a new path. She had never been the type to back down. The slap, while shocking, was liberating in its assertion of her presence. Maybe that boldness was precisely what the impatient, aloof world of tech needed. Perhaps she could be more than a face in a crowd, more than a waitress with beyond-the-minute dreams. With her mind racing, she sought out Ethan amidst the throng of socialites. He stood at the far end, effortlessly engaging with a small group, laughter spilling from his lips. How dare he look unbothered, she seethed internally. Just a few moments ago, he'd exuded an undeniable charm that made her blood boil. The electricity crackled between them. This confrontation was far from over. "Ethan," she called, adjusting her posture while taking a measured breath, recalling the words of empowerment she often shared with Sophie. Believing in oneself was half the battle. He turned, and his expression contained a combination of curiosity and irritation. Good, she thought. She was here to confront both. "Let us have a chat," she said, her voice firm. The group parted, momentarily shocked into silence as their focus honed in on her, every gaze amplifying the weight of her next moments. "What a surprise," Ethan replied, his tone ripe with condescension. "I never expected a follow-up to our previous encounter." "You don't get it," Julia replied, suppressing a gulp. "I slapped you because your industry perpetuates a system that puts people like me on the fringes. This isn't just about money or status, it's about recognizing potential beyond your privilege." His brow furrowed slightly, processing her words. Did he grasp the implications? Was this confrontation leading her anywhere worthwhile, or was she merely putting herself further at risk? Interesting choice of words. "You seem passionate," he shot back, and for a moment, she wasn't sure if he admired her spirit or dismissed it. "Passion is what fuels change," she said, steadying her nerves. "I refuse to let this moment fade into just another story about a woman who lost her shot because she got angry. Give me a chance to show you what I can bring to the table." The crowd around them murmured, curious eyes narrowing in. The tension twisted into something unexpected, a challenge wrapped in uncertainty. "What makes you think after the incident, I'd consider you?" Ethan asked, his gaze penetrative. "Because I'm not afraid to stand up to you." Julia could feel the stakes mount, her heart thunderous. This was more than her reputation, her self-worth balanced on a knife's edge. "And because I know that true talent doesn't come wrapped in privilege." Suddenly, she felt empowered by the knowledge that even amidst uncertainty, she could confront the barriers that weighed her down. She had everything to lose, but in that moment, she recognized she also had everything to gain. Ethan paused, an indecipherable expression curling at the corners of his mouth. Could he be intrigued? She needed to know. "What will it be, Blake? Are you willing to explore the potential beyond the confines of your comfortable world?" The silence was loaded with their unsaid ambitions. Deep down, Julia could sense her journey was leading her into uncharted waters. The game was afoot, and she was tired of waiting on others to define her. But before he could respond, another wave of voices from the crowd surged forth, and Julia noticed the shift in ambience. Little did she know, this was only the beginning of a confrontation that would awaken hidden forces in her life. What would she discover about herself next? Julia felt the weight of the silence pressing down on her as Ethan studied her with a mixture of intrigue and disbelief. The surrounding chatter faded, and for a moment, it was just them in this swirling sea of privilege and status. She could sense the curiosity of the onlookers, some amused, some sympathetic, but all captivated by the unexpected turn of events. Ethan finally stepped forward, his confidence returning as he crossed his arms. "You've got my attention, Julia. But my world is built on connections and resumes, not declarations." His tone suggested both challenge and an interest that she had not anticipated. Deep inside, Julia's pulse quickened. This was her chance to articulate not just her frustration but her vision for a future where individuality broke through the corporate monotony. What if I told you that those declarations could shape your enterprise into something more relatable, something that values authenticity over just profit? Ethan raised an eyebrow, displaying a flicker of interest. It was just the slightest crack in his polished demeanor, but it sent a wave of hope through Julia. What's your background? Why should I even consider this? His question hung in the air, a blade sharp enough to cut through her bravado. I've worked my way up from nothing, she began, her voice steady. I'm a single mother, juggling jobs while honing skills in marketing and digital communication during stolen moments nights when Sophie's asleep, or while waiting tables. I've learned to navigate the complexities of people's needs and desires not just from a textbook but from real experiences. With each word, memories unfurled her mother's struggles, the low-income apartments, late-night study sessions with textbooks that contained hope more than facts. I can bring a unique perspective that you're likely missing. Ethan seemed to deliberate, the wheels in his mind turning. Yet Julia noticed his jaw tense, as if the possibility of accepting her was almost threatening. And you think the tech industry has a need for your unique perspective? We pride ourselves on efficiency and performance. Julia shifted her weight, feeling the tension crackle around them. Efficiency comes at a cost. Narrow-mindedness stifles innovation. You want your companies to resonate with the public, don't you? Look around, how many of your peers have taken a chance on the unheard voices? Talent doesn't reside just in the circles you frequent. Ethan's gaze remained fixated on hers, and for an instant, Julia sensed a connection that emboldened her further. You and I, despite our differences, might actually have more in common than you expect. I challenge you to step outside of your bubble, to experience what countless others have lived. Listen to their stories. Craft something meaningful, something that doesn't just serve your elite friends. His eyes narrowed, as if weighing the merit in her words. There was a spark of recognition. Perhaps he began to grasp that in her boldness lay a reservoir of potential he hadn't tapped into yet. Bold words. But are you bold enough to show me evidence? He replied, skepticism coating his question. Absolutely, Julia answered without hesitation. Give me a shot to prove my skills, let me assist on a project. Watch as I transform ideas into strategies that deliver not just results but change. For a moment, silence enveloped them again, this time thicker, layered with a mixture of anticipation and uncertainty. And if I refuse? Ethan challenged, an eyebrow arched. Then I walk away, Julia replied, the conviction in her tone unyielding. But I'd rather try and fail than remain silent in the shadows. He regarded her closely. Behind the veneer of billionaire supremacy was beginning to emerge a flicker of respect. Perhaps it was curiosity, or maybe it was something more profound, a dawning realization that her words echoed a truth he had neglected. But even as she sensed the shift, a moment of doubt wormed its way into Julia's mind. Was she merely romanticizing the potential outcome? This could backfire miserably. Fine, he finally said. Voice low yet resolute. You can pitch me later this week. But remember, impress me or this conversation ends here. As he turned away, the crowd resumed its buzz, yet Julia felt invigorated, as if she had taken a critical step toward reclaiming her narrative. The fear simmered beneath the excitement. Daunting as it was, she was ready to put her skills to the test. But within that victory lurked a shadow of dread. Would she really be able to deliver? The stakes were higher than they had ever been. In pursuing this unexpected avenue, Julia had unknowingly opened a door that might lead her not just to career potential but into realms that challenged her very identity. What kind of person would she become along this road, and what truths might she confront about herself and those she veered away from? As she stepped away from the gathering, determination coursed through her, yet uncertainty trailed like a ghost. The moment had cloaked her in a veil of promise, but at what cost? In her mind, the question echoed painfully, waiting for its answer. Was she truly ready to face whatever obstacles lay ahead, or would she unwittingly retreat into familiar shadows of doubt? Julia arrived home, her mind racing with a cacophony of thoughts. The energy from the gathering clung to her as the door shut behind her, and she took a deep breath, grounding herself in the familiar chaos of her small apartment. Sophie's sweet laughter echoed from the living room where her daughter was playing. The sound pierced through her anxiety, reminding Julia of the stakes. She knelt down to meet Sophie's curious gaze and felt an overwhelming surge of both pride and fear. "Guess what, sweetie? Mummy might have a chance to work on something really important. Something that could make a difference," she exclaimed, forcing a smile that barely masked her uncertainty. Sophie tilted her head, her young mind processing the weight of Julia's words. "Can I help?" the little girl asked earnestly. "You already do, kiddo. Just being you helps so much," Julia replied, her heart swelling. But did she even believe it? The trembling certainty of her potential danced on the edge of her thoughts. As night enveloped the city, Julia retreated to her makeshift office, a small desk piled high with papers, her laptop glimmering to life. The chaos around her served as a backdrop to her resolve. She flicked through notes she had taken during courses, articles about corporate culture, and her own fragmented ideas that had whispered to her in the quiet of her nights. What was Ethan really asking of her? She struggled to define what she could offer beyond her passion. Her stomach twisted at the thought of inadequacy. She was an outsider in his world, a single mother with no prestigious connections, no Ivy League experience. The fear of being dismissed as an imposter loomed large. She could either lean into the conviction that had birthed her audacity or allow the shadows of doubt to consume her. With each keystroke, Julia planned her pitch, detailing her insights into the consumer psyche. Her experience taught her the importance of stories, those that resonated, that elicited connection. She knew how to humanize products, to narrate them in a way that engaged real people rather than cutting through them with cold metrics. If she was going to grab Ethan's attention, she needed to back her bold declarations with well-structured ideas they could visualize. At times, she paused, staring out the window as the night deepened. The inkling of fear slipped through her plans. What if she showcased her ideas, only to fail spectacularly? The thought tightened its grip around her chest, but she inhaled deeply, reminding herself that growth often sprung from discomfort. Instead of surrendering to her doubts, she turned them into catalysts. Julia embarked on compiling real-world examples of companies that flourished by focusing on authentic engagement, highlighting how diverging narratives produced a human connection that static efficiency could only dream of manifesting. As she pushed through the barriers of her own insecurities, a powerful realization took shape. It was time to stop rephrasing her worth and instead prioritize the skills she had honed through struggle and perseverance. She faced herself in the mirror, a silent challenge emerging. "You are worthy of a chance, Julia," she whispered. The following days transformed into a whirlwind of preparation. She practiced her pitch in front of a mirror, refining her presentation. Each rehearsal revealed hidden facets of her presentation style that felt thrillingly alive. Nerves bubbled, but so did the anticipation. She recorded herself, analyzing the confidence emerging as she spoke about her vision. Yet despite her growing resolve, a nagging shadow reminded her of the precarious edge on which she stood. What if this ends in embarrassment? The internal opponent was relentless, but she fought back with the stories that drove her, the long nights, the sacrifices, and the dreams. The night before her meeting with Ethan, Julia lay awake. The weight of the next day settled like a stone on her shoulders. Would he see her as she saw herself? Would he even care about the journey that led her there? The warmth of Sophie's small hand tucked in hers filled her with resolve. She would not let the fear of rejection define her. This was the moment to elevate her voice and to connect the fragments of her life with her aspirations. As dawn approached, Julia turned her focus from anxiety to determination. The road was fraught with uncertainty, but one thing was clear: she stood at the precipice of transforming not just her career but her identity. And as she prepared to step into that meeting, she clung to the realization this was merely the beginning. The time had come to unearth not just what she could offer the world, but what she could learn about herself through this process. With the morning light streaming in, illuminating her path, Julia felt an exhilarating sense of purpose. The next step was upon her, and she understood the fear might linger, but it would no longer hold her back. But just as she moved to finalize her notes, a thought danced across her mind. What if Ethan revealed an unexpected card? A facet of his world that might clash with her ideals? Whether the spotlight would shine on her or submerge her in shadows remained to be seen. The promise of change loomed ahead, fraught with potential and peril alike. Only time would tell if she could truly navigate it. Julia stood in front of the mirror, her reflection revealing both determination and uncertainty. Today marked a crossroads, not just for her career but for her identity. She adjusted her blazer and took one last look at the notes stashed in her folder. Each carefully crafted point represented the culmination of her struggles, her resilience battling the inner critic that insisted she didn't belong here. As she made her way to the meeting venue, she felt the city pulse with life around her. Yet, within that bustle, a solitary voice persisted in her mind. What if she was about to make a fool of herself? The thought tightened around her chest like a vice. Julia recognized it as the inner imposter speaking, a familiar but unwelcome companion. She inhaled sharply and pushed the voice aside. She owed it to herself to give this a fair shot. Upon entering the sleek glass building, a wave of confidence washed over her, albeit temporarily. The lobby loomed large, an intimidating space filled with suits and urgency. She spotted Ethan waiting, his demeanor calm yet dignified. For a fleeting moment, she considered bolting, but the thought of Sophie and her dreams kept her anchored, the fire to prove herself igniting anew within. "Julia," Ethan greeted, extending a hand with a slight smile. The warmth in his voice acted as an antidote to her anxiety, grounding her in the moment. They exchanged pleasantries, but as they moved to the conference room, the prevailing tension hung silently between them, a stark reminder of the stakes. Once settled, Julia took a deep breath, her notes splayed before her like a roadmap through uncharted territory. As she began her presentation, she slipped into the rhythm of her passion, the familiar narrative flow pulling her forward. She spoke of engagement, of stories that transcended data, her words weaving a tapestry of both insight and vulnerability. But as she glanced at Ethan's face, the composure he wore morphed into something unreadable. The flicker of skepticism in his gaze clashed with her growing excitement. "So, you really believe that consumers care about stories over statistics?" he interjected, a challenge simmering in his tone. Julia paused, the sharpness of his question piercing through her confidence. "Absolutely," she replied, trying to steady her voice. "People connect with narratives in ways they can't with numbers. It's those stories that motivate real engagement." "Interesting perspective," Ethan mused, a slight smirk dancing on his lips. "But in the corporate world, it's all about performance. Numbers don't lie." The words hung like a weight, shifting the ground beneath her feet. Did he view her passion as naive? Did he see her as just another hopeful outsider? Julia felt a wave of frustration rising within her, a blend of indignation and fear. Was her vision too far removed from reality for someone like him to grasp? As the conversation meandered in the direction of her vision versus his reality, the stakes escalated. She found her footing again, challenging him back. And yet, data without a story becomes lifeless, doesn't it? It's the human aspect that drives innovation. Otherwise, it's just numbers on a page. Ethan's expression shifted as if he was re-evaluating her assertiveness. For the first time, she saw a spark of intrigue, a crack in his carefully built facade. They continued to spar verbally, with Julia feeling the rush of defending her ideas, igniting a fire she had kept under control for too long. As the meeting progressed, Julia began to realize this wasn't merely about selling her ideas. It was about standing firm in her beliefs, confronting the doubts that plagued her for far too long. The confrontation was invigorating. She felt alive in her authenticity, pushing against the expectations imposed upon her. But with each insightful rebuttal, there was a nagging question in the back of her mind: what if she learned more than she anticipated today? What if Ethan's approach held merit? Could she reconcile her passion with the corporate world's systemic values? The final moments of their meeting loomed, and as they began to wrap up, she dared to push one last thought: what if you could marry efficiency with empathy? The challenge breathed deeply into the space, setting a new tone. Ethan's eyebrow arched, intrigued. Now that's a proposition worth exploring. But the moment was tinged with uncertainty. Had she crossed a line or ignited a spark? As they stood to leave, Julia caught a glimpse of something deeper in Ethan's eyes. Was it respect, or skepticism? The dichotomy hung uncomfortably between them as she gathered her materials, her heart racing with trepidation and excitement. The meeting may have ended, but her journey had just begun. She felt the intensity within her swell as she left the room, recognizing the paradox of her newfound courage, to dwell in the discomfort of her beliefs while navigating a world that sought to challenge them. But as she stepped out of the building, a single thought echoed ominously in her mind. The ability to reclaim her narrative might ignite a confrontation with herself she hadn't anticipated. What if she ventured further into this new territory only to find the very ideals she cherished being put to the ultimate test? Julia navigated the bustling streets, her thoughts racing in rhythm with her pace. The exhilaration of her presentation now mingled with unease, a complex concoction that stirred within her. She had confronted Ethan and held her ground, but uncertainty loomed over what this newfound assertiveness might cost her. Could she maintain this momentum, or would she slip back into familiar patterns of self-doubt? As the day progressed, she returned to her office, the familiar surroundings somehow feeling foreign. The walls echoed with the tension of her recent encounter. The happy chatter of coworkers became background noise as Julia replayed every moment of her exchange with Ethan in her mind. Did she present herself well enough? What would his feedback be? She mentally prepared for the critiques she anticipated, convinced that somewhere in his evaluation lay a confirmation of her worst fears that she didn't fit into this world after all. But instead of crumpling under the weight of potential criticism, Julia decided to re-examine her approach. Drawing strength from that earlier conversation, she sat down with a notepad. Her pencil scratched against the paper as she began to list her ideas, revisiting the concepts she had passionately defended. Efficiency with empathy. The phrase danced tantalizingly on the page. She realized that this wasn't merely theoretical, it could be a guiding principle for her work. How could she exemplify this fusion in her projects? Transforming data into human stories might not only resonate with the audience but also redefine the very framework of marketing strategies within her company. As ideas began to flow, an unexpected confidence surged through her. The tension that had gripped her before was replaced by purpose. Each note she jotted down felt like a step farther away from her inner critic. She felt a mix of power and vulnerability, both of which empowered her to embrace the uncertainty. Later that evening, she decided to take a break. The night air wrapped around her as she ventured to a nearby cafe, a place that had become her sanctuary. The smell of roasted coffee beans was oddly comforting, familiar enough to restore her focus. She sat at a corner table, watching the world hum with stories unfolding all around her. An older couple animatedly shared memories over steaming mugs. A barista crafted intricate patterns in lattes, pouring warmth into each cup. Julia realized that empathy was everywhere. She had to integrate it into her professional narrative, let it guide her journey. In a move reflective of her growing resolve, she opened her laptop and began drafting a proposal that integrated storytelling into their marketing strategies. She envisioned presentations that would not only highlight statistics but weave narratives that made the data relatable. This wasn't just about numbers but about sparking connection, a call to her team to see beyond the numbers to the lives behind them. But as she poured her heart into the proposal, an uncomfortable thought crept in. How would Ethan respond to this blend of her fervor and his pragmatic approach? Would he see the merit in her ideas, or would he dismiss them as idealistic? The following day brought another round of meetings. The thought of presenting her proposal to Ethan filled Julia with a heady mixture of anticipation and dread. Would she be met with his skepticism again, or would he acknowledge her growth? Stepping into the meeting room, her heart raced with a torrent of emotions. She clutched her proposal, a tangible representation of her evolution. Julia sensed that this was more than about professional success, it was an unveiling of her true self. Today, she breathed to herself, it's not just a presentation. This is me. As she prepared to face the questions and potential challenges, that familiar voice whispered caution. What if he's not convinced? Determined, she steadied herself. What if his skepticism transformed into curiosity? What if this was the beginning of a collaborative journey? The moment hung in the air as the meeting room doors shut behind her, sealing her into uncharted territory where courage met uncertainty. But as she looked up and found Ethan's eyes, poised and expectant, one thought echoed intensely in her mind. The stakes had never been higher, and only confrontation would lead to revelation. Would she break through the barrier, or would it all come crashing down? The atmosphere in the meeting room felt almost electric, charging Julia's thoughts with both anticipation and fear. Ethan leaned back in his chair, his fingers tented beneath his chin, an inscrutable expression on his face. Julia recognized that look. It meant he was evaluating her, weighing her merits against his preconceived notions. "Good morning, everyone," she began, her voice steadier than she felt. "What I'm presenting today isn't just a set of ideas, it's a vision of how we can reshape our approach to marketing." The words poured forth with unexpected clarity, and for a moment, Julia felt an exhilarating surge of confidence. As she unfolded her proposal, she highlighted her concept of efficiency with empathy. She illustrated how numbers could tell stories, connecting analytics with the audience's emotional experiences. She emphasized how tapping into genuine human connections would not only enhance their strategies but elevate the brand itself. Her heart raced in rhythm with her words. Ethan's brow furrowed as he listened intently, yet Julia could see the skepticism brimming behind his eyes. That familiar sensation of doubt flickered across her mind, but she refused to let it engulf her. Instead, she continued, encouraged by the possibility that her insights might resonate with others in the room. A brief silence followed her presentation, a heavy pause before the storm. She braced herself for his critique, fearing the weight of every word he might say. Ethan finally leaned forward, his expression still unreadable. "Your passion is evident, Julia," he said, his tone measured. "But how do you expect to balance this narrative-driven approach with the numbers-driven goals of our stakeholders?" The question struck like a bolt of lightning, igniting a swirl of emotions within her. This was the moment she'd prepared for. Would she falter, or would she push back? "By integrating data with storytelling," Julia replied, her voice steadying with newfound clarity. "We're not merely selling a product, we're promising a relationship, an experience. Data becomes the backbone of these stories, ensuring they resonate on a personal level." Ethan regarded her with a scrutinizing eye, and the tension in the room thickened. The other team members listened closely, clearly intrigued. Julia noticed Sarah, one of her colleagues, nodding along with approval. Just when it seemed Ethan might relent, he raised an eyebrow. "But stories can be subjective. How do we ensure that this approach translates into actual results? Marketing that appeals to the emotional side can often miss tactical targets." Heat rose in Julia's face, but she refused to retreat. "Emotional engagement leads to loyalty, Ethan," she countered. "When customers see their lives reflected in our messages, it creates connection. We're not just asking for a sale, we're building community. That's measurable in customer retention and satisfaction." Julia's resolve deepened with each passing moment. Was it truly possible that, for the first time, she was confronting Ethan and the skepticism concatenated with that challenge head-on? He stared at her, processing her words, and for a heartbeat, doubt flickered across his features. "What you're proposing is admirable, but if we push too far into emotionality at the expense of our foundational metrics, we risk." The meeting room door swung open abruptly, interrupting Ethan's words. Their manager, Tom, stepped in, sensing the palpable tension as he evaluated the scene unfolding before him. "Sorry to interrupt," Tom said, his voice a blend of authority and curiosity. "I caught wind of an interesting discussion in here. Julia, why don't you summarize your proposal for the team?" Julia smiled, a spark of excitement igniting in her chest. There was support waiting for her, a community eager to uplift and contribute. "Of course," she replied, keen to seize the moment. But as she prepared to reframe her thoughts, Ethan's piercing gaze intensified, a silent challenge lingering in the air. The stakes had transformed. This wasn't merely an attempt to gain his approval anymore. This was the fight for her vision, a chance to solidify her position within the company. Determined, Julia decided that her resolve would not only bolster her proposal but also open up a new trajectory for her personal assertiveness. As she spoke, weaving her passion into the presentation, she could feel a shift in the energy surrounding Ethan. Was he beginning to see the possibilities she proposed? Or would his skepticism crush her burgeoning confidence once more? Each word became a foundation, a brick in the wall she was building around her professional identity. But as the meeting progressed and the questions continued to flow, Julia realized that the real challenge lay ahead. Would she find the courage to stand her ground even when faced with potential dismissal from Ethan? With the meeting room echoing her thoughts, the words escaped her lips. So, what are the next steps? Just then, she glanced at Ethan, who had an inscrutable expression. Did she catch a glimmer of uncertainty in his eyes, or was it merely the reflection of her ambitions? As the meeting drew to a close, one nagging question lingered. Would the daring leap she had taken today be enough to secure her place in the company, or was her journey still only beginning? Julia emerged from the meeting room, her heart still racing from the adrenaline of the confrontation with Ethan. The cacophony of voices in the hallway surrounding her felt distant, muffled by the quest for clarity that filled her mind. She had entered the meeting with trepidation, uncertain of how her vision would be received, but now she felt as if she had unearthed a hidden strength within her. The gravity of what had just transpired settled around her. She had held her ground in the face of Ethan's doubt. How had she transformed her fear into an assertive dialogue? Perhaps it was true, she mused, that she had been underestimating her own potential. Faces flashed before her: Tom's approving nod, Sarah's supportive gestures as if to reinforce that she was not alone in this labyrinth of challenges. Yet the kernel of worry lingered in the back of her mind. Had she truly made any impact? Ethan's face had been a fortification of neutrality. It was impossible to tell if she had reached him at all. As she navigated her way back to her desk, her thoughts spiraled into plans. How could she further develop this approach and present it in a way that won over even the most skeptical stakeholders? Back at her desk, Julia's fingers trembled as she opened her laptop. She began drafting a follow-up email to Tom, outlining the core concepts of her marketing strategy, pairing them with data-driven forecasts. If she could crystallize her ideas into a tangible format, perhaps that would extend the conversation beyond just the meeting. Each paragraph she wrote was imbued with a sense of purpose, a testament to her newfound conviction. She paused, staring at the screen, the cursor blinking expectantly. A question nagged at her: was this the path to truly establishing her voice in the company, or merely an exercise in futility? She had spent too long worrying about being dismissed, being seen as just another cog in the corporate machine. No more. With renewed resolve, Julia decided to take a calculated risk. She included a call to action, inviting the team for a brainstorming session to explore how they might embody the concept of efficiency with empathy as a collective endeavor. As she clicked send, a wave of anxiety washed over her, but it was quickly replaced by the exhilaration of uncertainty. She wanted to cultivate a space where voices could blend and coalesce around fresh perspectives, encouraging everyone to find their own blend of data and emotion. This was no longer merely about her growth, it was about creating something that transcended individual contributions. Days passed, and with them, the feedback trickled in. The response to her email had been overwhelmingly positive, and Tom had scheduled a follow-up meeting to discuss potential next steps. However, Julia sensed a shift in the workplace dynamics. Alongside the support, whispers grew. Questions lingered about whether her approach could stand the test against more traditional methods. Then came the moment that upended everything. Julia was working late, poring over the data that intertwined with her emotional narrative, when she stumbled across a proposal from one of the senior executives that mirrored her strategy almost verbatim. Her heart sank. Instead of feeling threatened, however, a fire ignited within her. This was not merely about recognition, it was a fight for her vision. If they were going to succeed, she would need to refine her concepts further and distinguish her voice from someone else's. But how could she do so effectively while still confronting this challenge? It was clear she needed to articulate her story with even greater precision and depth, integrating tighter connections between emotional engagement and measurable impacts. Tomorrow's meeting was impending, and Julia now stood at the edge of a precipice. This was no longer just about presenting an idea, it was the chance to reclaim ownership of her narrative. Would her fervor be enough to assert her claims in an environment where new ideas often became diluted? The potential for confrontation loomed. Larger than ever, not just against competing proposals, but within herself. Tomorrow, she would face not only the scrutiny of her colleagues but perhaps the ultimate showdown with Ethan regarding who truly bore the unique vision they needed moving forward. The question now was troubling: could she harness the energy of this upcoming confrontation to further refine and advocate for her approach? With everything on the line, Julia realized that the moment of truth was drawing near. A decisive step on the path to fully realize her ambitions was waiting just around the corner. Julia arrived at the office the next morning with a palpable tension coiling in her stomach. There was something different in the air, a mixture of anticipation and apprehension that crackled around her like static electricity. After the sea of supportive responses, doubt whispered in her ear, reminding her of the uphill battle ahead. Today, she wouldn't just present an idea, she would stake her professional reputation on it. She took a moment to breathe deeply, looking around at her coworkers, who were engaged in quiet conversations, their faces a blend of focus and worry. Today's meeting could be a defining moment in her career. Julia reviewed her presentation for the umpteenth time, ensuring every detail was meticulously aligned with her vision of efficiency with empathy. The blend of data and emotional narrative had to resonate cohesively, appealing not just to Ethan's analytical mind but to the emotions of the entire team. She wanted to connect, to open their defenses and make them see the value of her approach. As she meticulously examined her slides, she became aware of Ethan's entry into the room. A chill crept through her as he settled into his chair, arms crossed, a subtle smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. It felt like a beacon of confrontation. He exuded an intensity that could extinguish her vision with a single expression. The meeting was about to begin, and she could feel her heart pounding in rhythm with her thoughts. Did she truly have the fortitude to stand her ground? Would her voice resonate stronger than the echoes of skepticism that lingered? Tom opened the meeting, setting the stage for Julia's presentation. As she stood to speak, the quiet room felt like an arena. She reminded herself of the warmth she'd felt from her coworkers, the solidarity that had ignited her passion and determination. And just like that, she transitioned from trepidation to action, setting her gaze on the audience, especially on Ethan. "Thank you all for joining today," she began, her voice steady yet firm. "I'm excited to share our vision on how we can not just meet our goals, but also cultivate a more empathetic approach to our customer relationships." With each slide, Julia grew more animated, infusing her data with personal stories that underscored the emotional importance behind the metrics. She articulated the value in connecting with clients, how that could evoke loyalty and enhance their overall experience. Yet even as she watched some of her colleagues nod along, she could see Ethan's neutral expression harden. The scrutiny felt like a spotlight, both empowering and suffocating. When it was finally time for questions, she sensed the tide shifting. Ethan was the first to speak up, asking pointed but expected questions that felt like verbal sparring. How can we justify investing resources in empathy when the numbers alone suffice? The challenge was clear. He was testing not just her ideas but her resolve. Julia inhaled sharply. This wasn't just about defending her proposal. Ethan's words felt personal, like an attempt to dismantle her very sense of belonging in the team. She forced herself to remember the fire that had ignited within her the night before, not just to defend her idea, but to claim her vision. "Ethan, our clients are not just a line on a balance sheet," she replied, her voice gaining strength. "Understanding their stories and emotions makes them more than just data points. It cultivates trust. In the long run, that trust translates to loyalty that directly impacts our bottom line. It's not an either-or situation." The room settled into silence, the air electric with unspilled words. Julia felt the weight of her colleagues' stares, waiting for Ethan's rebuttal. But this time, something shifted. They were no longer just teammates, they were an audience seeking insight and validation. Ethan's next words hung in the balance, a potential crossroads for Julia's professional journey. Would he recognize the power in her argument, or would he continue to undermine her vision? In that moment, Julia realized the question posed was not just about convincing Ethan, it was about her own conviction, her ability to validate her place within the company and the industry. Whatever the outcome, she was ready to assert her truth. As Ethan leaned back, an inscrutable expression crossing his face, Julia felt an inner resolve build. Today could either shatter her confidence or elevate it to new heights. She was determined to find out. What would it take for her narrative to resonate through the walls of doubt? And was she ready to confront whatever Ethan would throw at her next? This was only the beginning. The real test lay ahead. The meeting continued, a whirlwind of dialogue and critiques, but Julia had transformed. Gone were the remnants of self-doubt that used to clench her, replaced by an undeniable force of purpose. As Ethan continued to challenge her, she seized every inquiry as an opportunity to showcase the depth of her vision. Statistics can inform us, but they don't inspire, she countered, pulling from her heart. At their core, clients are human, and businesses thrive on relationships. Our approach should mirror that understanding. Connecting authentically breeds loyalty, while metrics alone can only take us so far. Each response sculpted her ideas into more than just suggestions, they became declarations of her identity. Julia observed Ethan closely, noting how his intrigued expression began to soften, perhaps realizing her points were rooted in undeniable truths. But the pivotal moment arrived when Ethan, with an unexpected glimmer of curiosity, leaned in and posed a critical question. You're asserting that emotional connections drive loyalty, but how would you translate that into actionable results? Can you show us that empathy isn't just a nice-to-have but an essential component for real growth? Without hesitation, Julia dived into her prepared insights, her passionate articulation entwined with concrete data. She demonstrated case studies of companies that adopted emotionally driven, narrative-based marketing strategies showing increased customer satisfaction and retention figures. When we adopt empathy, we don't just fuel engagement, we cement trust. That's measurable, quantifiable growth. As she wrapped up her presentation, Julia prepared for his rebuttal, but the tension in the room shifted. Unfortunately, instead of facing cynicism, she was met with thoughtful silence. Then, unexpectedly, one of her colleagues, Sarah, chimed in. I think what Julia is tapping into is more than just a strategy. It reflects a profound understanding of market evolution. People seek meaningful connections, not just transactions. The moment began to crystallize. It was no longer about Julia against Ethan. This was a collective awakening. Ethan's brow furrowed as he absorbed the moment. The tide was turning. Julia felt a wave of exhilaration and uncertainty. She had thrust herself into the fray, not merely presenting numbers but weaving her story into the fabric of the conversation, standing tall among her peers as a voice of change. As the meeting concluded, Julia sensed an unmistakable shift. Ethan's demeanor warmed. He acknowledged her contributions, offering insights that complemented her vision. Let us build on this, he said, his voice more collaborative than confrontational. How can we implement these ideas into our next campaign? Julia, I would like you to spearhead this initiative. In that moment, the air transformed into something electric, heralding the emergence of Julia's true professional self. Recognition flooded her senses as her colleagues nodded in eager agreement, reshaping the office dialogue around efficiency with empathy. Days turned into weeks, where Julia poured her heart into the initiative, leading brainstorming sessions where teammates contributed their ideas, transforming the energy into a genuine collaborative force. She could feel the hearts in the room align, as if her earlier presentation had birthed something larger than herself. And when the campaign launched, it exceeded expectations. The context-driven marketing struck a chord with the audience, and engagement metrics rapidly soared. The company thrived, and recognition trickled in from the senior executives. Her work had reshaped the foundation of their strategy. At the pinnacle of her success, Julia approached Ethan with gratitude. Thank you for believing in this vision. You allowed the space for my ideas to blossom, a testament to the conversation we shared, she said sincerely, recognizing how much her transformation had come to fruition. Ethan, with newfound respect illuminating his demeanor, replied, It was your passion that drove this, Julia. Your voice made all the difference. In that exchange, she realized her journey had transcended mere survival. She was making an impactful contribution. Julia had conquered the self-imposed limitations that had held her back. She had developed her identity not just as a professional, but as a woman deeply committed to her craft and her community. Confidence grounded her as she drove the next steps forward. When she returned home to Sophie, her heart swelled with pride. Mummy did something big today, she exclaimed, sharing her triumph. Sophie's innocent excitement mirrored her own, a reflective exchange of empowerment threading through their lives. As she tucked Sophie into bed that night, Julia recognized the profound journey she'd embarked on. With each challenge, she had reclaimed her narrative, embraced her voice, and proven that her experiences shaped her merit. From a waitress lost in a web of judgment to a leader honored for her insights, this was her victory. And in the stillness of that night, Julia felt a sense of solid confidence. She was no longer chasing external validation. She had internalized her worth and carved out her rightful place. With fierce resolve, she understood that true transformation comes from within, illuminated by the stories we choose to tell and live out loud. For you witnessing Julia's journey, now it's your turn to take action. Subscribe immediately to the channel to not miss the next exclusive emotional stories. Leave a like now to feed the algorithm. Seriously, it makes a difference. Comment your reactions and theories about the ending. What inspired you? Share instantly this video with at least 5 friends who need to see this conclusion. You need to subscribe now. This is the moment to show your support. Don't wait even one more second to share. True fans of personal overcoming stories understand the importance of helping the community through these actions.